The Gentiles don't have the law. And you say that because I didn't give the law to them, which, by the way, Jews, you were supposed to do because I said through Abraham that all the people of the world be blessed through you, and you took it and kept it to yourself. They don't have the law, so they're not going to be judged by the law. Because they become a law to themselves, Paul says. Those without the law will not be judged by the standard that they have not known. They will be judged by the standard that they have known. And Paul is writing about judgment, not salvation. This really has nothing to do with salvation. He's writing to the church in Rome. It has to do with judgment. And we need to be able, in our minds at least, and theologically, to separate salvation, which is a free gift, which was provided at the cross, with judgment, which we will face, and will receive just retribution. Does that make you uncomfortable? Let me put your mind to rest. Maybe. The one who sits on the throne, the judge, is Jesus. There's a song, what a friend we have in Jesus. All our sins and griefs to bear. We don't believe that, but that's what we sing. But there's one phrase in that that says, Jesus knows our every weakness. Take it to the Lord in prayer. So the one who sits on the throne, although we will go through judgment, although we will receive just retribution for what we have done while we've walked this earth, there need be no fear because He radiates perfect love. And we will realize at that time that whatever we receive at the judgment seat of Christ will be not to punish us, but to purify us. I'm not looking forward to it. I wish I could tell you that we didn't have to go through it, but Paul says we will all stand before the judgment seat of Christ. But the one who sits on the throne knows my every weakness. And the good news is He knows me and He loves me anyway. And so we will realize at that point that whatever retribution we may receive, and we will pass through the fire because none of us are going to be totally purified by the time we get there. We will pass through the fire, but those who have begun the purification process in this life will not need to go through as much fire as those who never began it here and will do it at the judgment seat of Christ. By the way, let me just say that Paul says we will all appear before the judgment seat of Christ. He also says in Romans 10, 9 and 10 that there are two requirements for salvation. First, if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord, and secondly, believe in your heart that God has raised Him from the dead, you will be saved. Those are the only two requirements. Let me pose this question to you. When we stand before the judgment seat, let's say those who rejected Him or didn't believe in Him or were of some other persuasion stand before Him. Will they acknowledge that God has raised Him from the dead? They can't deny it. There He is, in all of His majesty, splendor, and glory. So there's part of it. There's half of it. We're halfway there. And when they realize that He is the absolute embodiment of perfect love, they will willingly fall on their faces and worship Him. And that's the second part. Now for them, the purification process will begin at that point, and there will be a longer process. But folks, no one is going to be tortured by God, first of all, and certainly not without any end to it. And we will realize on that day that what we might call punishment is actually purification. And that it's really wasn't even in my notes. Paul says the law is written on their hearts, those who don't have the law. Last week I mentioned the God gene. Do you remember that? I know Amanda would because she took my book to read. But they have discovered what they believe is a part of our genes that makes us believe in God. And it's called the God gene. Well, maybe that's what this is talking about. That those who don't have the law really have a concept, have some grasp of what's right and wrong. And so that's what they're going to be judged by. Once again, it doesn't have anything to do with salvation. You know, people worry, well, what about those that never heard the gospel? Okay, folks are going to be all right. They're going to be all right. Because judgment has nothing to do with salvation. Salvation in this age and in the age to come is by grace, through faith, confessing Jesus as Lord and believing that God has raised Him from the dead. So those that haven't heard, now this doesn't absolve you of your responsibility of good newsing them, but they're going to be okay. And even those that have rejected or refused to believe will one day, every knee will bow. Every knee will bow. And every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. For what purpose? To the glory of God the Father. That God may be all in all. The greater our moral knowledge, the greater our moral accountability will be. If we know something's wrong, and we are privileged to have God's law, which is not the standard by which He judges us for salvation, but rather it is given to us because if we live by God's law, we actually will benefit. It's not for His purpose, but for ours. Especially if you look at the Beatitudes. Those are not legalistic rules that we have to live up to in order to please God. Folks, you're pleasing to God now. With all of the impurities, with all of the failures, you're pleasing to God. He loves you. If He has a refrigerator, your picture's on it. And there's nothing you have to do to make Him love you. And the other side of that is there's nothing you can do to make Him stop loving you. It doesn't have anything to do with that. But when we have moral knowledge, we have more moral responsibility. We will be judged by the knowledge that we have, not by the knowledge we don't have. And that's the point that Paul is making here. In conclusion, because we have no excuse, because God's judgment is inescapable, because God's judgment is righteous, because it's impartial, it will include all, we have a dual responsibility in light of that judgment. And what is it? Number one, good news. Or, a more familiar term, evangelism. But I'm not talking about the heavy-handed, beat them over the head with your King James Bible evangelism. I'm talking about telling them the good news. And when you do that, it's God's responsibility to get them into the fold. We're not the shepherds. Jesus is. We do have a responsibility to tell the good news, though. But oh, how much easier it is to tell the good news when you can really say it's good news. So that's one responsibility. A second responsibility we have is social action. When we see a wrong, we have a responsibility to take action. That's really what Jesus was talking about in Matthew 25. You see somebody hungry, you need to feed them. You see somebody without clothes, you need to clothe them. We have a responsibility to be like Jesus. That's all that this is.